Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we explore the chilling case of Michelle Turner's mysterious disappearance and murder. Michelle Turner's life had always been quiet and unremarkable. At 34, she lived alone in a modest, neatly kept home in Grand Haven, Michigan, a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. Michelle was well liked by her neighbors, even though she mostly kept to herself. She had built a steady, predictable life as a history teacher at Grand Haven High School, a job she took seriously and passionately. Those who knew her described her as dependable, reserved, and kind-hearted. She was the kind of person who would stop to help a stranded motorist or quietly pay for someone's groceries without seeking any recognition. Her routines were predictable, almost clockwork, and that reliability only made her sudden disappearance even more unsettling. On the morning of January 15, 2018, Michelle's absence was first noticed by her colleague, who expected her in the teacher's lounge. She hadn't missed a single day of work without calling in, and the lack of communication was out of character. By noon, her principal became worried and called Michelle's parents, hoping they'd have some insight, but they too hadn't heard from her. Later that day, the unsettling discovery of Michelle's unlocked car in the school parking lot raised the alarm even further. Her bag was left on the passenger seat, keys were still in the ignition, and her phone was left in the glove compartment. It was as if she had just vanished into thin air. The police launched an immediate search, scouring every corner of the school grounds, nearby streets and parks. Search parties were organized, and volunteers came from all around the town to help look for her. Michelle's loved ones clung to hope, but as days turned into weeks, with no sign of her, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Whispers began spreading across the town as people speculated about what could have happened. Some thought she might have run away, others suspected foul play, while a few wondered if she had suffered a mental break. Yet none of these theories seemed to align with the Michelle they knew. Despite the community's initial efforts, the case quickly grew cold. With no physical evidence, no known enemies, and no unusual activity in her life, the police had little to go on. There were no signs of forced entry in her car, no suspicious transactions in her bank account, and no messages or emails hinting at trouble. The lack of media interest also made the case fade from public memory much faster than anyone expected. In a matter of weeks, Michelle Turner's disappearance became another unsolved mystery, a fading memory in the minds of all but a few who had known her best. 3 months after Michelle Turner's sudden disappearance, a hiker made a chilling discovery near the outskirts of Grand Haven. The area was an isolated patch of dense forest about 10 miles outside of town, rarely visited due to its rugged trails and overgrown brush. But on that cold, early spring morning, the hiker noticed something strange: a section of soil that seemed freshly disturbed, with small, broken branches scattered nearby, as though something had recently moved through the thick undergrowth. Feeling uneasy, the hiker alerted the authorities, who arrived on the scene within hours. As the investigators began to dig, a sense of dread settled over the small gathering of officers and crime scene specialists. After only a few inches of digging, they unearthed fragments of fabric and other personal items, and soon the unmistakable stench of decomposition filled the air. What they found buried there confirmed the worst fears of Michelle's friends and family: human remains, badly decomposed and shallowly buried, as though someone had been in a rush to conceal them. The discovery sent shockwaves through Grand Haven. People had speculated and worried, but now the undeniable truth was unfolding before their eyes. Though the body was in poor condition, several personal items, a wristwatch, a broken necklace, and a pair of glasses were found near the remains. Michelle's family quickly confirmed these belonged to her, though it took days of forensic examination to officially identify the body as hers. The autopsy later revealed that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, suggesting a violent end. It was no longer a case of a missing person. Michelle Turner had been murdered, and someone had gone to lengths to bury her away from sight, in the depths of a remote forest. With this revelation, the investigation shifted into high gear. Detectives scrambled to revisit every lead they had, re-examining the clues from the original case with renewed urgency. They scoured Michelle's phone records, analyzed her bank transactions, and interviewed everyone who had any connection to her, hoping to uncover the person responsible for this heinous act. The quiet town, previously shaken by Michelle's disappearance, now found itself enveloped in a much darker reality, a murder mystery with almost no solid leads. Yet the more they dug, the less sense the case seemed to make. Michelle was quiet, responsible, and careful, with no apparent enemies or history of personal conflict. Her friends and family could think of no one who would wish her harm. But somewhere in the town, the murderer was hiding in plain sight, living among them, possibly even feigning grief. The case that had grown cold months earlier was suddenly back in the spotlight, casting long shadows over the entire town and leaving everyone wondering who could have done something so horrific to a woman who had never harmed a soul. As detectives delved deeper into Michelle's life, they uncovered a surprising detail. Few people knew Michelle had recently ended a relationship with a man named Lucas Hayes. Lucas was a local contractor with a reserved, almost reclusive personality. He was known for keeping to himself, and though he occasionally appeared at town events, few people could say they truly knew him. Investigators learned that Lucas and Michelle had been quietly dating for nearly a year before their relationship abruptly ended just a few weeks before her disappearance. To those who knew Michelle, Lucas seemed like a typical boyfriend, polite, if a bit distant. But their relationship, as detectives soon discovered, was far from perfect. Michelle's close friends revealed that Lucas had an intense side, bordering on possessive. She had confided in a few people about his controlling behavior, mentioning how he would often show up unannounced or send her messages demanding to know where she was. Michelle's friends described her as increasingly uneasy in the final months of their relationship, as though she were walking on eggshells. In one conversation, she even hinted that she had considered filing a restraining order against him. Naturally, Lucas became a prime suspect, but when questioned, he was calm and cooperative, claiming that he had accepted the breakup and moved on. He presented an alibi for the night Michelle disappeared, stating he had been out of town visiting family. The alibi was backed by phone records showing his phone's location, as well as statements from family members who claimed to have seen him that night. The evidence seemed airtight, leaving detectives frustrated. Without any contradictions, Lucas's alibi held up, and despite his connection to Michelle, there was no concrete proof linking him to her death. However, Lucas's name wasn't the only one that came up during the investigation. As detectives continued their probe, they stumbled upon disturbing information connecting Lucas to other women in neighboring towns. Records indicated that Lucas had previously been in relationships with several women, some of whom had either filed police reports for harassment or experienced violent incidents around the time they tried to break things off with him. None of the cases had resulted in charges, but the pattern was disturbing. It painted a picture of a man who struggled with rejection, a man who might be capable of violence if he felt abandoned or humiliated. Despite this unsettling history, Lucas's alibi for the night Michelle disappeared remained unshakable, and the case against him was purely circumstantial. The detectives' instincts told them he was hiding something, but without hard evidence, their hands were tied. Meanwhile, Michelle's loved ones were growing desperate for answers, believing Lucas to be the key to understanding what had happened. Yet each time they thought they were close to a breakthrough, the trail seemed to grow colder, as though someone had meticulously covered their tracks. Suspicion continued to cloud the investigation, casting doubt and mistrust across the town. The shadows around Michelle's case grew darker, making her once bright, orderly life seem distant and mysterious, concealed beneath layers of secrets and half-truths. Months passed with the investigation into Michelle Turner's murder seemingly stalled, but a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In late spring, a new lead surfaced when detectives revisited Michelle's phone records one last time, hoping to uncover something that had been overlooked. It was during this review that they discovered a series of unsettling messages from an unknown number. The messages, sent over several months leading up to Michelle's disappearance, were disturbing in nature, vague threats and insinuations that suggested someone had been stalking her. The language was not direct but filled with veiled warnings, like "you can't hide forever and I'm always watching." The investigation quickly zeroed in on the burner phone used to send the messages. The phone had been purchased from a convenience store not far from Michelle's house, 2 days before the first message was sent. Security footage from the store showed a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt, obscuring most of his face, but his build and posture were recognizable. While the footage was grainy and unclear, investigators noted a striking detail: the man's body type and movements bore a strong resemblance to someone Michelle had known well, Patrick Moore, a quiet and unassuming history teacher who had worked alongside her at the high school. Patrick had always been friendly with Michelle, but like many colleagues, their relationship had been strictly professional. There had been no signs of anything unusual between them, at least not outwardly. However, detectives learned that in the months before her disappearance, Patrick had grown more overt in his attention toward Michelle. He would often linger near her classroom after school hours, offering to help with paperwork or talking to her about unrelated matters. Though Michelle never complained, her friends later revealed that she had seemed uncomfortable at times, especially when Patrick would show up uninvited or try to engage in long, drawn-out conversations. This new revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Patrick had always been considered a harmless figure, almost invisible in the social fabric of the school. Yet now it appeared that his feelings toward Michelle had been far more intense than anyone had realized. Was he the one sending the threatening messages? Was it possible that he had taken his infatuation too far? As detectives dug deeper into Patrick's background, they uncovered more unsettling details. He had a history of infatuations with former colleagues and had been known to act possessively toward women he felt a connection to. Though no prior accusations had ever resulted in any legal action, the pattern was clear enough to raise suspicions. Patrick's phone records showed several attempts to contact Michelle in the days leading up to her disappearance, though she had not responded to any of his calls or messages. It was clear now that he had been trying to establish some sort of contact, but whether it was out of concern, obsession, or something darker remained a mystery. Despite the mounting suspicion, Patrick denied any involvement with Michelle's disappearance. He claimed that he had simply been concerned for her well-being and had tried to reach out as a colleague and friend. But his explanations felt hollow, and his refusal to provide a clear alibi for the day Michelle vanished only deepened the detectives' doubts. The possibility that Patrick could be hiding something, perhaps even something much darker, began to loom large in the investigation, casting a shadow over what had once seemed like a simple case of a missing person. As the investigation into Michelle's murder progressed, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A woman named Helen Price, who had recently moved to Grand Haven, came forward with information that would change everything. Helen had been a new acquaintance of Michelle's, having met her just a few months before the disappearance. They had bonded over shared interests and became close friends quickly. However, Helen shared that in the weeks leading up to Michelle's vanishing, Michelle had confided in her about growing concerns regarding two men in her life, Patrick Moore and Lucas Hayes. Helen explained that Michelle had mentioned feeling watched, as though someone was following her. She had also described feeling increasingly uneasy in the presence of both men, though she never went into specifics. Michelle had confessed to Helen that Patrick's attention had become more persistent, with him frequently showing up at her classroom uninvited and lingering in hallways. Michelle had felt uncomfortable, yet she had brushed it off, not wanting to make a fuss. Helen also recalled Michelle mentioning Lucas in passing, noting how he had taken the breakup hard and had begun showing up at her house without warning. Michelle was afraid that Lucas might not take no for an answer. This new information caused the detectives to reassess their entire approach. Helen had revealed that Michelle had also made a troubling statement just days before her disappearance. She had planned to confront both men. Whether this was a planned conversation or just a fleeting thought, it was clear that Michelle had been feeling cornered by the attention of the two men. The timing of this confession raised even more questions, as it now seemed possible that Michelle's fear of both Patrick and Lucas had played a significant role in her disappearance. The investigation quickly turned back to both Lucas and Patrick, now armed with the knowledge that Michelle had been worried about both of them. For the first time, detectives felt that they might be closing in on the truth. But there was still a twist in the case, something that would change everything once again. A further investigation into Lucas revealed something troubling: a storage unit he had kept under an alias for years. When police searched it, they found a collection of photos and personal items from several women who had been in relationships with him, many of whom had experienced strange occurrences or had gone missing after breaking things off with him. The most chilling discovery, however, was a series of photos of Michelle, taken without her knowledge, some of which were dated just days before her disappearance. In addition to the photos, the search uncovered disturbing handwritten notes that detailed Lucas's obsession with Michelle. He had kept track of her daily routine, noting where she went, who she spoke to, and even how long she stayed at work. The evidence was damning. When confronted with these discoveries, Lucas broke down and confessed to the crime, admitting that he had been following Michelle for weeks, unable to let go after their breakup. His obsession had driven him to stalk her, and when she had rejected his advances one last time, he had lost control. In a fit of rage, he had attacked her, killed her, and buried her in the remote forest, hoping that her body would never be found. While the confession brought an end to the mystery, it left the town of Grand Haven shaken. Michelle's tragic end served as a reminder of the dark side of obsession, and how a seemingly ordinary life could be shattered by a hidden danger lurking just beneath the surface. The investigation that had begun with so many questions and so few answers had finally reached its conclusion, but the haunting memory of Michelle's life and her untimely death lingered in the town long after the case was closed.